Managing culture, again. And this is the hip-hop generation. What's had a more negative effect, and I know we spend millions of dollars in this category, but what's had more negative effect on basketball than the grassroots environment in youth basketball? You got to teach them that, son, it's no longer about you, it's about us. You see, we live in a me generation right now. Instant gratification everybody's looking for. Coach, you're messing with my game. I had a player when I was at Washington State came in one day, told me, he said, Coach, you're taking my game away. I said, hell, son, I thought I was doing you a favor. Because you can't shoot, you can't defend. I don't have anybody else to put in your place, so I got to play you. He looked at me and said, oh, and turned around and walked out. But hell, sometimes you got to tell them the truth. Most of the players understand what your expectations are. My question to you is, do you know their expectations? Do you know their expectations? Do you sit down and ever ask them? You can't assume you know what that child wants. And that includes LeBron, because I say he's a child. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. But do you know what his expectations are? Because what you might find out, there's a huge gap between your expectations and his expectations, or her expectations. And when you discover that there's that huge gap, how are you going to diminish that gap so that you now can evolve into a partnership? How are you going to do it? Coaches' salaries. Probably more at the collegiate level this is applicable, but coaches' salaries. Coaches' salaries have changed the whole game. I want to say to you, and there's probably not many of you in here that are making this kind of money, if any, don't let money become a narcotic in your life. Don't let money become a narcotic in your life. Don't let it alter the way you act. Don't let it alter the way you think. Don't let it alter what you believe in. Stay true to you. This whole thing about money, and I'm not bitter about it. I started at Washington State as head coach in '72 for 22.5 and was happy as I could be. And I don't begrudge these guys for making that money. But sometimes money becomes a narcotic. It dulls your passions. It puts you to sleep. And all of a sudden, you're not as hungry anymore. Because now you can afford 3 or 4 steaks. Now you can afford 3 or 4 homes. Now you can afford 3 or 4 cars. But is that what it's all about? Is that why you got into coaching, to make money? Many years ago, up at Kutcher's Country Club, Will Robertson, old scout for the Detroit Pistons, I know him for years, came up to me and he says, hey George, he said, when are you going to get a head job? And I said, well, I had a couple offers, but there wasn't any money in it. He said, what? I said, wasn't any money in it. He said, hey son, let me ask you something. You want to make money, you want to coach. That's the way it was back in those days. And today it's the same. You want to make money or you want to be a coach. You want to make a difference in somebody's life or you want to make money. You can do both, but don't let that money become a narcotic for you. Unrealistic expectations of parents, impatient parents. The first thing that we have to understand is, as a parent, none of us are going to be objective about our kids. Many years ago when I was at Washington State, Lenny Wilkins called me and said, "Can I get my kid in your camp?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Why are you asking?" He said, "Well, everybody keeps telling me it's sold out." I said, "It is, but not for your son." And then in making conversation, I said to Lenny, is Randy any good? And Lenny told me something I'll never forget. He said, "George, never ask a parent to evaluate their child, because they'll never be objective." And as coaches, we have to understand that coming in the door, the parents are not going to be realistic about their child. Most of them today think they're all going to live off the child for the rest of their life. He's going to go to the NBA, make this pile of money, and we're going to live happily ever after. They don't understand the system's not exactly like that. But you got to deal with that. Innovators and visionaries. This troubles me about the game. Today, in my humble opinion, the game has few visionaries, has few innovative thinkers. The game, in my opinion, suffers from groupthink. Back in the old days, when you had the Bones McKinneys, the Vic Bubises, the Lefty Drizels, the Ray Mears, those guys were innovators. You know who started all this office and all these fancy locker rooms? Ray Mears at Tennessee. Do you know who started Midnight Madness? Lefty Drizel at Maryland. These guys were innovators. They were visionaries. Tell me where they are now in the game. Tell me who's going to take this game forward. Who amongst you is going to take this game forward? Who amongst you is a visionary? Who amongst you is an innovator? Or are you just going to copy what everybody else is doing? Are you going to be a victim of groupthink? Or are you going to dare to be great? Are you going to dare to think differently? Are you going to say to yourself, there's another way to reach heaven? I don't have to do what everybody else does to get there. There's another way to win. There's another way to achieve success. You got to figure out which it is. Where are the John Thompsons? Somewhere in Washington, D.C., there's a little black kid walking down the street, and there's a wooden fence there, and the wooden fence has got a little knothole in it. He looks through the fence, and he's saying, where is the next John Thompson? Where is he? Where is that coach who's going to stand up for what's right? Where is that coach who's willing to put his life on the line, his career on the line, because he wants to fight injustice? Where are they? Is there a John Thompson amongst us today? Where have all our leaders gone? Where have they gone? Yeah, you lead your programs, but you have a responsibility to the game. This game's been damn good to you. It's been damn good to me. We have a bigger responsibility than winning. We have a responsibility to be guardians of the game, to grow the game. Where have all the visionaries gone? Where have all the innovators gone in the game? Ah, God, think about it for a little while. Here's some research that I had done on the Final Four. And the covert message as you read this screen is, there is no job security. You think you have job security? You say to me, damn right I got it. I got a lifetime contract. And then one day the boss calls you in and pronounces you dead. You got a lifetime contract till they want you dead. There's no job security. Here's living proof of it right here. Only 7 of the last 27 teams have the same coaches they had 10 years ago that got to the Final Four. I wrote this down. During the 60s, 70s, and 80s, getting to the Final Four translated into job security. In the 90s, security's fabric started to weaken. In the 20th century, the fabric broke apart. The harsh reality is there's no longer such a thing as job security. There's a good article today on ESPN.com by Dana O'Neill. It's a blog and it's titled, "The Next Coaching Generation's Reason to Fret." You ought to read it. NBA coach, high school coach, or not. Dana O'Neill, his blog, ESPN.com. A hell of an intriguing article about where the coaching profession's going. Do you really understand what constitutes success for you in your job? What you think constitutes success and what your boss thinks constitutes success, there could be a gap. Some kind of way you've got to find out from your boss, what does success look like to you? Because it's a hell of a lot more important to understand what success looks like to him than what you think it looks like to you. I wrote this down. Believe me, what you determine to be success and what your boss views as success can be a vastly different. How can you play the game if you don't know the rules? How can you play the game if you don't know the rules? You've got to find out how does your boss determine what success is. You've got to make him tell you. You got to put it down on paper. And when he tells you, follow it up with an email and say, Sam, I was in your office yesterday and we talked about a variety of things, but one of the things that we really focused on was success achievement. And this is what you told me. And I want to make sure I didn't misunderstand what you told me. And make it a matter of written record so he can't back off. And then when you achieve it, he can't come up with amnesia. What constitutes success? Paul Hewitt. Took a team to the Final Four. Winning record. Guys are graduating. I don't know about this last thing here with this NC2A thing, but I do know that he took a team to the Final Four. He had a winning record, never embarrassed the school. He was going to take the St. John's job. He comes back, he tells the AD, I think I'm going to take the St. John's job. Calls him from the airport. By the time he gets home, the AD's at his house, begging him to stay. You my man. We believe in you. This is the best fit Georgia Tech ever had. We want you to stay. 12 months later, they sent him out the door. But Paul was smart. He had his contract well written. Lefty used to say, George, son, when you send him out the door, send him out smiling. Well, goddamn, if Paul didn't go out smiling, with his pockets filled with $6 million. If they're gonna let you go, make them pay for it. Make them pay for it. Coaching realities. The first one is fundamentally obvious. The road to the top has changed. Success has changed. It's all about getting players now. You know it. It's all about getting players. Hell, I call up for a particular friend of mine. I must have made 20 calls this year to try to help him get an assistant's job. 9 out of 10 times, the guys were nice and polite to me and all that, but they said, Coach, I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm looking for a guy who can bring me players. Looking for a guy who can bring me players. But you know what? I said to one of the coaches, I said, let me ask you this. When the player goes, have you ever thought you're stuck with the coach? You know, it's a way to try to evade hard work. Get me a guy who can bring me a player. Bring me a player. You don't know if the guy's a felon. You don't know if he's on drugs. You don't know if he's got 2 kids or what. Bring me a player. Okay, coach. What should the player look like when I bring him to you? That's the mantra today in college basketball. Who can I get on my staff that can bring me some players? Sad, sad, sad situation. Contract negotiations. Most coaches could insulate themselves pretty good if they knew how to write a contract. The AD say, I'm not going to deal with an agent. Hey, then you got the wrong guy then. Here, you need an expert. Your job's on the line. You need an expert to help you write that contract, to fortify you. The big damn thing today is $1 million buyouts. You know where the buyouts started? At Washington State when I was coaching there with football. Washington State had 4 different football coaches 4 consecutive years. So Sam Jankovic, the AD, said, God damn, I'm tired of this. And so he came up with this concept of a buyout. If you leave, you're going to have to pay. Scared the hell out of coaches back in those days. But you know what? I don't have a big problem with it, because if it's me and you tell me that you want $1 million buyout, I say, okay. What I now understand is, number one, this. I understand what's in it for you. Now, let's deal with what's in it for me. If you think I should have to pay to go, then you should have to pay to keep me. So here's what the deal is, and we can move on. I want you to put $150,000 in an annuity for me every year that I stay. It's only fair. You're asking me to pay $1 million to leave, so if you think that I should have to pay $1 million to leave, then damn, you ought to have to pay to keep me. I must be a valuable commodity because you're putting $1 million tag on my head. See, you can't let them people put that whammy jammy on you. You got to come right back at them. Talk about coaches getting off the practice floor sometimes and sitting up in the stands and getting a different perspective on it. I really believe that. I think sometimes when you're down on the floor every time, you can't see the trees for the forest. I learned this from Ralph Miller at Oregon State. Every practice, Ralph would take 20 minutes and leave the floor and go up and sit in the stands and let the assistants run the practice. And he'd just sit there and watch. Ralph was the best coach I ever coached against. I coached against John Wooden. I coached against Adolph Rupp. I coached against some pretty good coaches in my day. But Ralph Miller, I tell people all the time, when they say, who was the best coach you ever coached against, I tell them Ralph Miller. The guy was a hell of a coach. He got more out of his talent than anybody I know. You operate in an environment for what have you done for me lately? It's a reality. So I say to you, do you have a strategy for managing expectations? And if the answer is no, my next question is why not? Do you have a strategy for managing expectations? If you do, you can save yourself a lot of hardship. You've got to have a strategy, a player strategy, a parent strategy, GM strategy, an AD strategy, a president strategy. How do I manage their expectations? How do I manage them? The methodology we talked about already of selecting assistant coaches today has changed. It's not about experience. It's not about X and O's. It's all about recruiting. It's all about recruiting. Those guys don't realize it, but the coach is doing them an injustice. Part of a head coach's responsibility is to prepare his assistant coaches to be head coaches. Not to be big-time recruiters, but to be head coaches. That's a fundamental responsibility that you have at the NBA level, at the college level, at the high school level, to prepare your assistants to become head coaches, not to become the chief recruiter. How much honor is there in that? Oh, hell yeah, it helps your ego. I recruited this guy, I recruited that guy. But is it getting you further up the ladder? Are you becoming a better coach? If the coach drops dead tomorrow and you have to run the program, can you run it? And all of a sudden, that kid you brought in, he gonna turn on you too. He gonna say, oh man, I'm your boy, man. I know I'm supposed to get more shots. I know I don't have to do all this stuff. Hey, like Lefty told me one time. He said, George, you see where, I was sitting in front of his desk. He said, George, you see where you're sitting? I said, yeah. He said, you see where I'm sitting? I said, yeah. He said, son, one day you're gonna find out there's a hell of a lot difference in where you sit and where I sit. And when I got to Washington State at the end of the first year, I called him on the phone and I said, Coach. And I relived that conversation with him. And I said, I want to be man enough to call and tell you that you were right. It's a hell of a lot tougher sitting in that seat where you are than where I was. All I had to do was make suggestions, and you had to make decisions. And now that I'm in that seat, I got to make decisions, and sometimes I'm not sure I'm prepared to make the right decision. A lot of times in here, I'm going to talk to you about strategy. It's the Nike part of me coming out. Is they teach you to be a strategic thinker, to look at things from a strategic perspective. I don't think it's any difference in coaching. You have to have a strategy. You have to think strategically. We're going to get to a part in here on recruiting that I'm going to show you that I think will help you think strategically about recruiting and that. But, you know, we look at those things and we talk, I mentioned this before, it's all about instant gratification now. Fast food, fast service, everything is fast. Everybody wants it, boom, 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 boom. Nobody wants to slow the motor down anymore. Nobody has any patience anymore. But you can't let that alter the way you operate. You can't let that alter the way you think. The second to the last one is don't underestimate the importance of connecting with your campus, the sororities and that. Hey, let me ask you this. Do you know how many answers there are on your campus? Do you know how many answers there are on your campus, high school, college? Do you know how many answers there are in your city in Miami and Dallas? Do you know how many answers there are in Texas and Florida? Do you? You're on this big campus. Some of the world's most foremost authorities are on your campus. They've got the answers. Do you interact with them? Do you bring them in to talk to your kids? Do you invite them to lunch? When I was at Washington State, I called Woody Hayes up to speak at our banquet when we went to the NC2A tournament. I said, Coach, I don't have much money. I can only pay you $5 grand, but I'd love to have you. He says, Coach, I'm not interested in the money. He says, here's what I want you to do. Call me back tomorrow. Find out who is the most distinguished professor on your campus and call me back. So I call him back and I tell him it's a guy in veterinary medicine, won a Nobel Prize. He says, okay, I'll do it if you can get me lunch with the guy. So he knew there's answers on every campus. We just won't go seek them out. You got all these people sitting on your campus who adore you. You got all these people sitting in your city that got the answers, and you don't use them. Shame on you. Shame on you. You're in constant search of answers. Get those people and help them help you find answers. I'm trying to figure out where the hell I am here. I guess I got the right slide here. Okay, so on this slide, what I wanted to share with you was this, and I wrote it down. I don't want to get it wrong. One of the most important and valuable characteristics a human being can possess is self-awareness. Self-awareness. Know what you know. Know what you don't know. Know what you know what you don't know. You've got to begin to establish your limitations. And if you don't, it'll be a difficult process.